you, because Fez, I have to just say that you're one of the most decent and nicest people that I've ever met in politics. So thank you very much for coming on today. I really appreciate you being here.
I really appreciate that.
Thank you. We'll get a better earpiece thing for you next time. Thank you. All right. I'm going to now bring in my panel, LaTosha Brown of Black Voters Matter, Glenda Carr, President and CEO of Higher Heights for America, Maria Urbina, National Political Director at Indivisible, and Rachel Bitecofer, Assistant Director of the Wason Center for Public Policy. Thank you all for being here. And thank you all for sitting and listening in on this. I'm going to come to you first on this, Glenda, because it is true. I mean, Fez really is nice. I mean, he really is a good guy. And the thing that's so interesting about the Sanders campaign is that the thing they're arguing for is true. Right? We live in a country in which the super rich have guacked so much money and resources and taken so much from ordinary people that now even what used to be sort of white privilege can't even cover it anymore for a lot of working class people. And they're pissed off, to be honest. People are pissed off to the point where you have people talking revolution. There is a real reason that the Sanders movement has the energy and even the anger and the rage that it has to it. Yeah. At the same time, I do kind of contrast it with the Jesse Jackson movement, because I remember it from junior high and high school being like a joyous version of that same thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there was something about it that had a joyfulness to it, even in the struggle. Is that really the dichotomy? Is that the thing that Sanders has not been able, at least outside of the movement? Because in the movement, they're like, we're joyous, you know, but outside, somehow it hasn't gotten through.
I think that's interesting, because the first campaign that I volunteered on was a teen for Jesse Jackson, right? Yeah. And it's something about building an inclusive movement that you can see yourself in. I think we all agree that, in theory, his vision for the country is exactly what Black Americans want to see. Yeah. The question is the road to 2020. Can you center a campaign that I can see myself in and activate in? Yeah. And that is what I think the Jesse Jackson, you know, his whole movement into his '88 campaign did. Like, for me to be I think I was 16 or 17 at the time, where I go to my parents, I'm like, I need to get on that, right? Yeah. And I was an intern sitting at SEIU in Hartford, Connecticut, right? Yeah. So it's like, how do you do that where you can engage me, but also my great-grandmother? Yeah.
And it's interesting, you know, LaTosha, because the thing, and I think having that endorsement from Jesse Jackson actually is important. I mean, you know, Senator Sanders, I think when he was a congressman at the time, endorsed Jesse Jackson in 1988. I'm not sure if he did in 84 and 88, but I know he endorsed his presidential campaign. And they're, you know, the things they're fighting for, if you look at both of their sort of lineups of the things they want, are very similar. It's very similar to kind of like a Kingian kind of push for broad social justice. You know, it isn't, the racial justice of it is not as overt, but there is that broad sort of social justice. So it is there. I wonder if you, as a person who's an activist, who's out on the ground, like actually getting people to vote, do you have an understanding and an explanation as to why it has not caught on more with Black voters?
I think there's a number of things. There's three things that come to mind. The first thing is that when you think about Jesse Jackson, what you think is hope, the word hope. And so what we hear in the Sanders campaign is we hear this vision. Even when I was talking to people about kind of his vision around health care, people, it's almost in some ways, folks don't really know what that means. Matter of fact, I had one family member that talked about part of their challenge around voting for Bernie Sanders is because they didn't know. They were like, the expansion of Medicaid for all. They was like, well, I've been on Medicaid. I was on Medicare as a younger person, and I didn't have a good experience. And now, does that mean that I'm not going to have that? My engagement in the healthcare system has been distinctively different. The second thing, though, I think that is really important is really around, while politics is personal, that is relational. And so part of what I think that the Biden has been able to do is that people feel, for whatever reason, they feel a sense of connectiveness. They feel like they know him. There is the point in terms of Bernie that folks are not feeling, not all, but some of the folks that I've been talking to on the ground don't feel, they don't feel the warmth, they don't feel the connectivity. You know, and I think the third thing is that I think it's really important that Black voters, before they want to get married, they want to be courted. And so I think one of the weaknesses in the campaign is you've not really seen a courtship from the Bernie campaign, specifically for Black women, specifically saying Black voters. He's not going to, he didn't go to Mississippi. He didn't show up for Selma for the Bloody Sunday March. And so I think that there's another element around that is nuanced around how people connect to the candidate. That is one thing, and I think that's a critical mistake that sometimes white liberals make, that oftentimes they make this mistake that thinking that because they've got a good progressive agenda, that in itself is enough. And while the agenda is one thing, the other thing that is really important is for people to feel connected and to feel that actually you center and you can see them within the context of the agenda that you're pushing. And I think that that's a major criticism that I hear oftentimes from black voters that I'm talking to.
Yeah, and you know, Maria, because, right, I think not going to Selma was a data point, right? That it was obvious he wasn't there because everyone else was there. And, you know, and I think so not going to Selma then is added on to not, you know, really being that president in South Carolina. It's additive in a sense. But with Latinx voters, it's a very different thing. There is more of a connection. He is doing much better with Latinx voters than he is with black voters. Do you have an understanding of why that might be?
It's certainly an interesting question, Joy, and I'd start by saying that, one, I think it's really important that I'm really excited to be part of this discussion because I know that this panel is badass and we're not going to have a discussion of brown and black voters because I think that doesn't advance our justice and freedom together. But what I do think is true is that Bernie Sanders saw that he made serious investments in the Latinx vote in 2016. He was incredibly popular among young Latinos, and they looked at that playbook and they built on it. And in some ways, if you look at Nevada, if you look at California, and even some in Texas, there were gains made with Latinos, and really that's one of the few places they're seeing gains made. They need to see similar gains with young people if they want to remain incredibly competitive in this race. And the other point I think that I've been reflecting on around Vice President Biden is that Vice President Biden didn't have, you know, a ton of infrastructure, campaign infrastructure in some of these states where he's becoming more competitive now. And it goes back to that conversation that we're having around coalition building, around who are these leaders that you've been investing in over time? Who are these likely party people who you're investing over time? And those folks who are coming now and endorsing Vice President Biden. If you look in Arizona, for example, Ruben Gallego, who's a progressive, came out and endorsed Vice President Biden as they approach the Arizona primary. And so that sort of network of people who are coming together is helping him quite a bit. And you're seeing that a little bit more now in the progressive movement with Justice Democrats endorsing Senator Sanders this morning. Yeah,
I mean, it is interesting, Rachel, that, you know, and we talked to the former campaign manager for Cory Booker on the show yesterday, and it is actually true that weirdly, I mean, it isn't weirdly enough. I mean, he was his vice president, but it does seem that what Joe Biden has been able to do is to assemble much of the Obama coalition. Like that is the thing that he's doing that is helping him. Does the data bear that out?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, when we look back at the autopsy for the Sanders 2020 campaign, I think the diagnosis is going to be this campaign came in with a robust, you know, advantage in the progressive community. They had that front-runner status. For a little while, it was tested with Warren in the invisible primary in the fall, but that was a short-lived challenge. And what they really needed to have done these 4 years in between the runs was start to figure out how to expand that base of support out towards the party's mainstream. To some extent, they did start to do that with Latino voters, and the difference, of course, is that the center of gravity within the Latino coalition is a younger electorate amongst black voters. It's an older electorate, and that socialism label is a huge, I mean, it's just something that Warren wouldn't have had if she ended up being the progressive frontrunner, right? And I just think that, you know, Bernie is the imperfect messenger for the policy prescriptions that movement is trying to advance, because it makes it hard to bring in that mainstream coalition, because people are risk adverse, especially in this environment where they are really wanting to beat Donald Trump. Yeah. And, you know, putting radical policies up is one thing, or bold policies, you know, some might say, but it's quite another to say to the electorate, we want you to run a candidate that calls himself a democratic socialist. I mean, that is a very large gamble to ask a pretty moderate electorate to make.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna keep everybody in to come over, because that is definitely true. Because one difference between Jesse Jackson and Bernie Sanders is Jesse Jackson was a Democrat, and so you can coalesce around the fact that he is part of the party. So there's a whole discussion. We're going to keep everybody around. We have a lot more to discuss, but we have to take a break. We'll be back.
We're not alone. We are all in this together.
NBC News producer spoke exclusively with Senator Kamala Harris right there in Selma just moments ago, and she artfully redirected the focus back to her endorsement of former Vice President Joe Biden today and not toward any VP type speculation. But they tried. God bless them. Okay, our panel is back with us. Rachel Bitecoff, I want to go to you first. Let's put up the delegate map. Michigan is the big haul that is available, 125 delegates. Any predictions for us as to how next Tuesday is going to shake out?
Yeah, I think, you know, this nomination is really in bad shape for Senator Sanders. My expectation is that this Tuesday is not going to go well for him. We're going to see Biden expand on his delegate lead. I cannot stress how bad Super Tuesday went for the Sanders campaign, and that this nomination is probably going to fall in Biden's favor without the fears of a contested convention that we were looking at. So.
Wow, that's pretty definitive. Maria Urbina, wow, that's definitive. So if it plays out that way, Maria, you're from Indivisible, which you guys are grassroots based. What in your mind would have to happen for Biden if he were to get through? And we don't know that's going to happen. We just, you know, Rachel's good, but we go with what she says. But if that happens, right, what would Biden have to do to bring over the activist, really active part of Bernie Sanders' base, at least the part of it that's willing to move?
Yeah, certainly this is still very much a contest between the two of them. But I think you're right that if Biden were the nominee, he has a lot of work to do to really listen in to the rest of the grassroots community that's been organizing during the midterms, during this primary race. Folks want to know that he cares about bringing the party together. And Vice President Biden should have just as much responsibility as the Sanders folks are asked to have around bringing the party together and really being unified. And in order to do that, there has to be a little bit more digging and listening. For example, we'd love for Vice President Biden to fill out our Indivisible scorecard questionnaire, which we haven't been able to get a response on.
Well, he should do that. And is there one issue out of the things that Bernie Sanders has advocated that Biden should consider adopting as a policy of his?
Actually, I would say the one issue that Senator Warren has led on is democracy reform and having a governance agenda that actually sees institutional changes so all of these progressive policies can be enacted, including the filibuster reform.
That is a good one. LaTosha Brown, one of the things about Selma is that it is fundamentally about voting rights. We basically don't have much of a Voting Rights Act left. And I'm wondering how you think that winds up impacting a year in which there are several Senate seats up in the South. Can the Democratic Party compete in the South? Is it realistic? Should they be spending money in southern states? What are your thoughts?
I absolutely think that we should be seeking every single Senate seat that we can get. And in the South, you've got critical seats coming up in Georgia in particular, and holding on to the seat in Alabama. You know, there were people that wrote off Alabama, a state that is deeply conservative. And what happened? When there was an investment and black voters were activated, that's what happened. And so the same thing in Georgia. I think there's a real possibility in Georgia. I think it is critical for us not just to focus on the presidential election, but we've got to focus on these Senate seats. There has to be investment in the regions, investment in the South. Even when we look at Texas, I think there's some real possibilities in Texas as well. And so this is an election for us not to marginalize the power of black voters and how we literally can invest and get some of these Senate seats.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just writing down as you're talking. South Carolina has a seat up. Mississippi. Georgia has two. Kentucky has one. Texas. Alabama to preserve that seat for Doug Jones.
To preserve that seat.
Absolutely. And Doug Jones is one of the good guys, by the way. Doug Jones is a civil rights lawyer, is worth keeping. He just based on his record. Talk about somebody's record mattering. Let me come to you to the table, Glynda Carr, because the key to the election, the keys are held by black women in a lot of ways for Democratic. Really, not even just in a lot of ways, they just are. And so I wonder if Joe Biden's strength and his being powered by that very vote, the vote that you concern yourself with day to day, does it wind up being enough if Biden can't somehow bring in the Sanders faithful?
Well, I think if the Democrats want to win in November, black women are the building blocks to that foundation. But it's the strength of the foundation. Yeah. We still need to build the rest of that house. Yeah. And so that is not only strengthening the relationships with African Americans across the social economic backgrounds, geographic, age, right? If he's not able to actually create some excitement. Yeah. So we are voting because this is an important political moment. are we actually going to activate our network?
Does he have to put a black woman on the ticket to do that?
I think, well, obviously for Higher Heights, we absolutely want to see a black woman as a VP. We did a survey over the summer that shows that overwhelmingly African-American women want to see a black woman in the White House.
Yeah, yeah.
And we need to determine, at this point, it needs to be a black woman in the White House.
By the way, I don't talk about people's age, but happy birthday. I found out from a little secret that it happens to be your birthday.
It is.
Go,
it's also
Glenda.
International
It's
Women's
your
Day.
birthday.
So as
Go,
we celebrate International Women's Day,
Yes.
we need to ensure that we're having black women at decision-making tables. And so both candidates need to be seriously looking at a black
Look at Glenda using her own birthday to celebrate International Women's Day because she's just that lucky. But give her my thanks to my panel, Latasha Brown. Can't stop, won't stop. That's, that's your name. Maria Urbina, Rachel Bitecofer, the scientist, Glenda Carr. Thank you all very much. You guys are great. Coming up, Elizabeth Warren grants an interview with Laura Ingraham. Kind of, sort of. More AIM after the break.